Hello, it's Wednesday, 10th of November 2021. Today I'm going to be talking about The Cure's 10th or 11th album, depending on your point of view about the glove, and the years 1998 to maybe about 2001, 2002. The album is Bloodflowers, and there are also going to be discussions of a couple of other things that came out around about that time, including the Greatest Hits album called Greatest Hits. That's an imaginative title, and Acoustic Hits, which was the bonus disc that went with that. Being a Cure fan in the year 2000 was a sometimes unrewarding experience, and I'll explain why. Because it was a really difficult time for the band and a difficult time to be a fan of the band, although you may not necessarily think so. This story starts off in 1998, hot on the heels of the less than amazing selling Galore compilation album that was released in late 1997. While Mood Swings had come out in 1996, the band had obviously tried some new sounds, but they just weren't having the hits in the way that they used to. They weren't selling tickets the way that they used to. I think they sold 5,000 tickets in Birmingham, as opposed to selling 23,000 4 years previously. They had gone from playing 3 nights in Wembley Arena to trying to play 2 nights at London's Earls Court and cancelling all the suburban dates to bring people down into London so they can still fool you into thinking they're a big band playing Earls Court. And they'd played 3 London shows and a less than well attended UK tour. 1997 saw the tour of smaller venues, 2 nights at Shepherd's Bush Empire. It's easy to sell out a venue that's a tenth of the size of the one that you played 10 years, or more correctly 10 months before. And they sold out Shepherd's Bush Empire pretty quickly, but that's less than 2,000 tickets a night compared to Earls Court's 22,000 tickets the year before. And 1998 saw the band really at a bit of a crossroads. So the previous album, Wild Mood Swings, had not sold well. It hadn't had hit singles. The tour hadn't sold well. The Greatest Hits album, you can always rely on a Greatest Hits album, right? Hadn't done particularly well. Galore hadn't sold enormous amounts. The tour was gone to very small venues by The Cure's comparison, although there is no interpretation of the word intimate that involves having 3,000 people around you. And so therefore The Cure were really, I think, at a commercial crossroads. It wasn't quite sure, well, what was being in the band anymore? What was the point? People weren't coming to the shows. And I think it was probably the lowest point that me as a Cure fan experiencing the band in real time. It was the lowest point to be a Cure fan since 1988 at least, which is when I got on board the Cure train. I had to be honest, I wasn't sure who still listened to the Cure. As I said in my previous episode, the 15 people I knew that wanted to see the Wish tour, 2 of us went to Wild Mood Swings. Hi, James. And then none of us went to the Shepherd's Bush show because that was in London, which was 110 miles away. It was a long way to go, and frankly, I was at the point where I couldn't really travel to go to shows. Summer 1998 saw the band play a series of European festivals, probably about 12, 15 shows in Europe, a combination of festival appearances and outdoor venues, and it saw what I regard to be the 3 worst Cure shows I've heard on record, even worse than the last show of the Pornography tour. So 1998 saw, in reverse order, the Bizarre Festival, which I think was probably one of the worst shows, the Bruno Festival, I think it's called, and the Leon show. Bruno just feels a little bit like it's a band on autopilot, but it is the last show of the tour. The Bizarre Festival is a bad performance. The band were hampered by equipment and technical issues. They're also hampered by the fact that some of them were drunk, some of them got their parts wrong, and it just sounded like a bad night to be in the Cure. But the very worst Cure show I've ever heard is Leon, which is about the 27th of July 2002. This is a shambolic show. Robert is clearly shit-faced, and absolutely doesn't want to be on stage and doesn't want to be playing that show. It's one of the shorter Cure shows that there is. He doesn't bother singing huge chunks of some of the songs. When he does bother singing, he can't hit the notes. He gets the words wrong. He's just not there. Physically he's there, but he's playing a performance. He's playing a role, and he's playing it badly. He did not want to be singer in The Cure that night. There's footage of Disintegration, the worst version of Disintegration I've ever heard, where he practically gets down, lies down on the stage, and kind of just sings. Although singing is a very generous way of describing the kind of half-assed talking that he does his way through Disintegration. And you can clearly tell he's at a crossroads. In your mind and your ego will tell you that as you get older and as you progress through the course of your career, that you shouldn't necessarily lose success. Certainly in terms of if you're in a really really big band and you've been in a really big band and that band's been really big and practically invincible for the past 20 years, everything has been a meteoric rise up to 1992. Is that, as the cliche goes, what goes up must come down, and The Cure, boy did they come down. They came down very very hard in 1998, and that show is terrible. As I said before, Wild Mood Swings was the sound of a band reinventing itself, and for the first time the band didn't connect with the world around it in the way in which it had done previously. 1998 was kind of like the legacy of that. It was the hangover that you got from the starting, creeping end of the night, end of the party kind of feeling that you got with Wild Mood Swings. And 1998 was very much a year where the band were lying on the sofa, desperately craving bacon with a pounding fucking headache that wouldn't quit, that they really just thought that the sun was too bright and the cat was too loud. It was one of those years, I think, and it wasn't a good year to be in The Cure. And then there's the existential question around that, which is, if you've been in a band all your life, you've not gone to have a day job or something like that. You've built your identity and your perception around being in a successful band, and then that band stops being successful. Do you stop being who you are? Do you become someone else? Do you become a has-been? And obviously, fame expands and contracts. Bands become more or less popular at various points in time. Sometimes there's no rationale or reason behind that. But obviously, you're facing a situation where the things that you took for granted, or the things that you understood to be the core parts of your identity, started to unravel. And those core parts would have been being in a band, the band being successful, having a degree of financial security that goes with it because you're selling a certain number and amount of tickets. And it started to feel that, certainly for two of those shows, the Bizarre Festival and the Leon show, it felt like The Cure had become a bit of a job and he didn't want to turn up to work. At the same point, I was going to work every day. I didn't want to be there, but thousands of people weren't looking at me, and I couldn't, I didn't have to pretend for 2 hours around what it was. I was looking at, my life, and I was wearing a suit, and I was sitting in a big open plan office surrounded by hundreds of people, some of whom I didn't know, some of whom I definitely didn't like, and I was going, this is what I'm doing for that. It can't be that bad, doing 13 days work a year, standing in front of thousands of people a night and making a substantial amount of money as a result. There comes an element where you go, well, actually, if you don't want to be in The Cure, don't fucking do it. Do something else. Obviously, The Cure, I think, almost regrouped, retrenched, and started again. Now, in 1998, the band only released, I think, one song, which is on this compilation album. It's called For the Masses. It's a compilation of cover versions, specially recorded for the album, of Depeche Mode songs. It coincided with Depeche's singles 86 to 98 album and tour. And this features the only Cure song, I think, from that particular year, which is a cover version of World in My Eyes. It's a Robert Smith solo track, branded as The Cure, that he did in one day in a studio in Reading. He did try to play and record Walking in My Shoes, but he didn't think that it was particularly good, and so he scrapped it and did World in My Eyes on its own. It's okay. It's very clearly not The Cure as a band, it's The Cure as an individual, so it's basically a Robert Smith solo track. 1999 saw lots and lots of rumours flying about, the band were going to go back and they were going to do the darkest thing ever. It was going to be a sequel to Disintegration and Pornography. It was going to be dark and gloomy, and The Cure were going to go back to their roots. This manifested itself in February 2002. I think it was released 4th of February 2000. The Bloodflowers album. It was released on vinyl. 10 tracks and CD as 9 tracks, because CD ruled the world. This was before Napster came and overturned everything. And vinyl was seen as a luxury format, somewhat niche, so you now had vinyl bonus tracks as opposed to CD bonus tracks. And the album was released with 2 different track listings depending upon where in the world you are and what version of the album that you bought. This is a promotional CD of Bloodflowers from the UK. It has unique disc art, I think, on the front, and it also has a unique back cover. There's the back cover to Bloodflowers, but it's a 9-song album here. It's about 58 minutes of utter misery. And that's in no way a criticism. I think Bloodflowers is a very good album. I just don't think it's a very good Cure album, which I'll explain. In Australia and Japan, Bloodflowers was released as a CD with a bonus track on it called Coming Up, sandwiched in between Maybe Someday and The Last Day of Summer. So let's go through the Bloodflowers album, and then we'll talk about a lot of the associated releases that went with it. So Bloodflowers was the first album that the band made, which to me sounded like the Cure starting to retreat. So every previous album up to Bloodflowers, the band had gone in some new direction. They'd tried something new with varying degrees of success. Wild Mood Swings introduced a kind of jazzy inflection to the sound, which obviously wasn't successful and not one that the band really repeated ever again. Bloodflowers, to me, felt a bit like the band had gone, right, so we've tried a jazzier, brighter, different sound for Wild Mood Swings. People weren't buying that. We tried the Greatest Hits album. People weren't trying that. We're going to go back to the other thing. We're going to get back into our box of being miserable as fuck. And so Bloodflowers is an album that's not light and shade. It's all shade. It's all dark. There's no singles off Bloodflowers. There were never any singles off Bloodflowers that were released commercially. There weren't any, there weren't any brighter songs that made the album have a kind of a feel or an atmosphere. It was all gloom and doom. There was no sunshine in the album whatsoever. It's a really good album, but it makes pornography look like Michael Jackson's Thriller. It is not a happy experience, and because it's not a happy experience, to me it feels like the Cure are going, well, the fans like the miserable stuff and we like having fans, so we're going to do miserable stuff. And also, if we don't release singles from the album, we can't have singles that weren't hits. So if we don't release singles, we don't have hits. And saying when we did release singles, we weren't having hits. So now we don't release singles, we don't have hits, and we pretend that was what we wanted all along. I don't buy that at all. I think the band realised that if they were going to try and have hits, they were probably going to fail. And rather than fail, they were just not going to try in this particular instance. And so they did a concerted, concentrated album that is very, very difficult to penetrate, except as a complete and total work of art. It's like if somebody had taken Love Song, Lullaby, Fascination Street, Pictures of You off Disintegration, and what you're left with is Plain Song, Closed Down, Last Dance, Prayers for Rain, The Same Deep Water as You, Disintegration, Homesick, and Untitled. That is a hard meal to eat. It really is. And some of the songs, which were later released as singles, Just Say Yes, for example, were written during the period for Bloodflowers and taken off the album as they were too poppy. If you were a fan of The Cure at the time, there was a bootleg tape of leaked studio demos, which is now called Lost Flowers, which had 15 songs on a C90 cassette. I had the cassette somewhere, I can't remember if I've still got it. And that C90 cassette had 15 songs on, and apart from the song that eventually turned into Just Say Yes, they were bleak, like a grey, cloudy day in Britain in the autumn when it gets dark at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's what Bloodflowers is. And it felt to me that it was the first time that the Cure had gone backwards in terms of their musical progression. So the other albums all introduced new flavours into the sound, or new ideas, or perhaps new elements. Wish brought in a 3-guitar attack for the first time. Wild Mood Swings brought in a jazzier sound to the group and more use of horns, textures, and things like that. Bloodflowers, it's all miserable, and that is it. It's a good album. I listened to it today. It's a really good Cure album, but it feels incomplete, and it feels a little bit that for the first time, The Cure were doing what The Cure thought Cure fans wanted to hear, and The Cure weren't doing what The Cure maybe naturally felt like doing. On the other hand, this could be a completely perfectly natural response to suddenly realizing you're not a huge mega selling international pop star anymore, and you're miserable and bummed out about the fact that you don't necessarily get to have private jets anymore. It's, that would depress me. If someone said, well, actually, I was only earning millions of pounds a year as opposed to tens of millions of pounds a year, I'd be bummed out, absolutely, unquestionably. But it felt a little bit like The Cure were retreating and giving people what they thought people wanted, as opposed to what being the best kind of Cure that they could be. And it's the only album of The Cure's where I can really feel that I can say that. The other albums, for better or for worse, always felt like The Cure were being more honest to themselves, whereas the Bloodflowers feels a little bit like it's taking a position as opposed to reflecting honestly perhaps certain things that happen in the group. So the album opens on Out of This World. Out of This World has a shot of the band playing on stage. I think that is taken from the Bruno Festival, which I think is in Prague, and I think Bizarre might be in Cologne actually. And Out of This World and Watching Me Fall are the first two songs on side one of the vinyl version of the album, and they come to 17 minutes. They're epics, no two ways about it. Out of This World is a great song. They still open shows with it occasionally. I think they opened the last night at Wembley in 2016 with Out of This World. And Watching Me Fall is 11 minutes, and it is, you feel every one of those seconds in that 11 minutes. And that's not to say it's a bad thing, but it is unashamedly long and difficult. This is not an album that is designed to be played on the radio. This is an album that's designed to be played at home. And since the band knew that they weren't having success, they weren't having hits, they deliberately went for the selective element of it. So the touring for Bloodflowers, instead of playing 2 nights at Earl's Court and 1 night at Wembley Arena, which is 56,000 tickets, for London they played 2 shows. One at the Astoria, which is now nothing, more correctly, the blank air above a train station, which has 2,000 tickets, and another one at Wembley Arena, which is 12,000 tickets. And unless you lived in London and liked The Cure, you weren't going to be able to see The Cure unless you drove a very, very long way indeed. I was in Birmingham at the time, therefore I didn't get to see The Cure on the Bloodflowers tour until the very last show at Roskilde, and I had to fly to another country to be able to see The Cure that particular year, because that was a makeup show from a cancelled show that should have happened in the year 2000. Now, it's very easy to put a sold out sign on Wembley Arena. It's very easy, therefore, to say that you've sold out Wembley Arena, which, by the way, is an achievement very few bands get to do. But selling out Wembley Arena, whereas previously you'd sold out the equivalent of 5 Wembley Arenas, maybe 4 years before, it still allows you to have that air of exclusivity and demand, and doing sold out shows. Well, if you just shrink the size of the show, then that doesn't mean it's necessarily sold out by any previous standards. It just means that you're still pretending that you're going to sell out big venues, where you just play less venues less often, and you should sell less tickets overall. Third song on the album is Where the Birds Always Sing, which I think is one of the great underrated Cure songs that there is. All of the songs on this album individually very, very good, by the way, but the album as a whole, to me, doesn't quite gel as a good album. Where the Birds Always Sing has, like a lot of the songs on this album, a very philosophical kind of lyric, a very thoughtful approach. So Robert is clearly in the lyrics. He's asking a lot of questions around, well, what is it? Who am I? What am I going to be? Why do I do this? And and it opens with the line, the world is neither fair nor unfair. The idea is just a way for us to understand, but the world is neither fair nor unfair. So one survives, and you always want a reason why, but the world is neither just nor unjust. It's just us trying to feel that there's some sense in it. I mean, to an extent, you might go, well, that's, sixth form poetry. But, these are grappling with the core existential factors of being alive is going, well, is the world fair or unfair? And then you're reminded of the quote that Stanley Kubrick said, which is, one of the most terrifying possibilities in the world is the fact that nature itself does not care. It will continue whether whether it is fair or unfair to you. The events will happen irrespective of whether it is fair or unfair to you. And it's a major, quite a terrifying quote. Someone should use it at the start of a horror film, of course, but they probably wouldn't get permission from the estate of Stanley Kubrick to do so. And I think Where Birds Always Sing is, it's almost like a bleak nihilist kind of philosophy or manifesto. It says it doesn't mean that there has to be a way of things, no special sense that hidden hands are pulling strings, but living on in others, in memories and dreams, is not enough, and it never is. You always want so much more than this. If those are probably the most miserable lyrics which I think I've ever seen. This side of it doesn't matter if we all die in a high building. There is so much to do. And then there's also, track 4, Maybe Someday, the closest thing the album has to a hit and a commercially released single. Which was released as a promotional CD, and there were some remixes of Maybe Someday, and there was even actually a 12-inch version of that, which I'll show you in a moment. And Maybe Someday is a great song, but when I think I last saw them play it live, which I think was at the London O2 Arena in 2009, the last UK show, by the 4-piece version of the band, to me it felt very distinctly that the band were... This was a song that sucked all the air out of the room. It was not a hit, and even though the band were doing a thematically designed show at that point, 2009 show had 6 songs from Three Imaginary Boys, 6 songs from the most recent album, 413 Dream, and 1 song from every other album in the set. Maybe Somebody felt to me like it was the wrong song, but it was the most commercial and obvious hit song off the album, and on any other Cure album it would not have come anywhere near the charts, or would have not been considered as the big song off the album. It would have been thought of as a good album track, but one they probably shouldn't play live too often. Track 5, only on the vinyl edition of the album and the Japanese and Australian CD, is Coming Up, which has a slightly different sound to the rest of the album. Coming Up reminds me of Club America. It's got that kind of pounding, relentless rhythm and beat, and it's got that kind of half-spoken vocal, which Robert Smith does. But the thing when Robert does the half-spoken vocal and he's not really singing, he's kind of talk-speaking his way through the lyric, to me it feels like he's not as invested in the song as perhaps he could be, because one of the things that makes The Cure unique is that the qualities of Robert's voice and the qualities in which he sings that voice makes you feel that is actually, there's truth and honesty and goodness in that voice. And when he speaks his way through the lyric, it doesn't feel perhaps quite as compelling as otherwise. Coming Up reminds me, by the way, a lot of a bonus track called Possession, which is on the Join the Dots box set, which I'll mention later on, because their band still did loads and loads of songs. They just didn't release them on singles because there weren't any singles. And then track 6 on the CD, 5 on, well, track 6 on this version, and on the final version, track 5 on the other ones, is The Last Day of Summer, which is a song that I always listen to on the last day of summer every year. And again, that's not a single. It's got all the component parts of a very, very well written song, but there's nothing about it that you go, that's a hit. And then you've got There Is No If, which opens up with the line, do you remember the first time I told you that I love you? It was raining hard and you never heard. You sneezed and I had to say it over. I said I love you, I said, and you didn't say a word. Man, we've all been there, haven't we? Well, more correctly, if we haven't, we're very lucky. That first moment where you tell somebody that you love them, and there's a whole bunch of conversations that you have inside your head before that happens. Either you say it, you don't think about it, and it's just very instinctual, or you kind of know that you're starting to fall for somebody, and then you're starting to grow feelings for somebody, and then you go to the point where you go, I think I have to tell this person this thing, and at some point I will tell the person this thing, and those are my feelings about them. and you kind of go, am I sure? Are they thinking the same thing? Or am I just making it up? Is it all in my head? Am I imagining it? And then you say it, and then sometimes they look at you like you've told them that their cat is dead. And then other times they say the same thing back. And it's a really scary moment. And I don't think there's any other song that really details that, perhaps quite so elegantly, really. Now, there's 3 songs to go on the album. There's the Loudest Sound, and there's 39 and Bloodflowers. And you know, each song on the album has a graphic that kind of goes with it, generally speaking. So, for example, Where Birds Always Sing is a bird in a cage. Maybe Someday has a kind of like photograph of a chair in the recording studio. The Last Day of Summer has that. And then there's I love this little image here, actually, these 2 hearts of different colours that are next to each other, mirror images, clearly the same image, but also at the same point not the same thing. And then the Loudest Sound, it really reminds me lyrically of things like The Drowning Man of Faith. And there's a lot of elements of actually, you know, is Robert starting to repeat himself in some of his lyrics? Is he revisiting the same things that he addressed 10 years or 20 years previously on 17 Seconds and Faith? And if so, how is he approaching them now, looking at them as a 40-year-old as opposed to looking at them as a 20-year-old, now that he's twice the age he used to be? You know, some of the things that are human experiences, human conditions, human feelings, they're exactly, you know, they're perpetual, immortal moments in you know, the person's heart. You know, my experience of love as a 40-something is very different to my experience of love as a 20-something. But I'm still, you know, the core feeling is still the same. My relationship to that feeling and how I articulate that and how I live that is very different now. But it's still, you know, the same core feeling of wanting something for somebody that is best for them, even if it is not necessarily always the best thing for you. And sometimes that way, the way in which you truly love somebody, is not in a selfish way, but is if that person is not happy with you, you then, if you love them, you then have to go, but I want you to be happy, even if it is not what makes me happy. I mean, obviously there comes a point where you have to put yourself first. And I think when I was younger, I didn't necessarily always realise that. Sometimes I was unhappy because other people were happy, and what I didn't necessarily realise is that person, whoever that person was, didn't love me. They loved the fact that I enabled them to be that person, whoever that person was. But you know, there you are. Then there's 2 songs on the album. There's 39 and there's Bloodflowers. The band have played 39 as recently as their summer 2019 shows, and Bloodflowers as well, both of which, these 2 are fantastic album closers, make no bones about it. The problem with Bloodflowers is that firstly it's got no hits on it. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it feels like they've deliberately taken any song that is anything other than a grim, unrelenting gloomfest off the track listing, so that you're totally fucking bummed out by the end of the album. And the Cure are both light and shade, not just shade. 39, fantastic song. It's got this great drum part by Jason. I know people don't like Jason. I don't like people that don't like Jason. And it's got this repetitive, circular, spindly guitar line. The type of guitar that Robert used to play a lot when he was in Susie and the Banshees, by the way. And it kind of works its way through the idea of mortality and running out of time, running out of fire necessarily. You know, the light that burns twice as bright burns half as long, and you have burned so very brightly. Is perhaps one of the things. That's a quote that's designed, I think, to fit right inside 39. It's going, I know that certain things can't be perpetuated forever. And then there's the final song, which is Bloodflowers itself, the title song. Not the first title song that the Cure ever had, of course. They had The Top, they had Faith, they had Disintegration, I think they had 17 Seconds as well. But overall, Bloodflowers, I think, is a very good album. It's not the best Cure album. I think it sounded like the band had designed Bloodflowers to be an album that would please their fans, as opposed to necessarily be an honest artistic statement. Nothing wrong with it, I just don't think it's particularly amazing. So there you have it. Bloodflowers. So that sounds like a talk about just the album, and I can't believe I've spent this long talking about it. That's the UK promo 9-track version of it. There are a number of releases that went alongside Bloodflowers. Here's the 2020 picture disc double vinyl version of the album. Take these picture discs out. This has been remastered, by the way, by Robert for the vinyl edition, although sometimes I think remastering is just a very technical excuse for changing the EQs by 1%, just so you can say that it's been remastered so they can sell it to you again. It's a great to get these Cure albums back on vinyl. They should be on vinyl more often. Talking of which, fellas, I think you need to put Wish out on vinyl again, and you also need to put the Cure 413 Dream Festival and other various releases that are only on CD out. So this is side C and D of the vinyl picture disc of it. There are a number of other releases around about this time. Let's start with some of these. There was a promotional CD of Out of This World, which takes the cover photo from the Out of This World panel on the CD booklet, puts it in black and white, blurs it up a little bit. It looks like it's a version of the actual photo as opposed to a photograph of it appearing on a screen. It features an edit of the track, which isn't available anywhere else, and the album version of Out of This World. There was also a 4-track promotional CD of Maybe Someday, which I don't have because it is staggeringly expensive and was never released as a single. Maybe Someday was released as a single, and this is where it gets unusual. On this, the remix XFM 12-inch single, which I think this came out in 2002, so 2 years after the album came out. Maybe Somebody finally got a single release, but only on a 12-inch, and this features the hybrid mix, radio edit, the hybrid remix of Maybe Someday. The second track on it is the Prodigy's Smack My Bitch Up, not two artists I was expecting to see together on the same 12-inch. And the B-side is the much underrated Scottish artist Dot Allison, who also sang in a fantastic band called One Dove. If you like Screamadelica by Primal Scream, get One Dove's Morning Dove White. It is Screamadelica, but with a different band. A fantastic bit of production by Andrew Weatherall, by the way. So Maybe Someday got a release as a vinyl single in 2002, really snuck out there. There were also some white label 12 inches and test pressing. So here's a test pressing of the Maybe Someday remix 12-inch. The Cure's commercial kind of profile was at its all-time low at this point. See, there were boxes of this 12-inch for 50p in London at the time. The band went on tour, and they deliberately played smaller venues than they had done previously, in order to sell tickets. So, for example, here's one of the bootleg CDs. This one's called 20 Years. It was recorded at the AB in Brussels, which I think is a fantastic venue, and I've seen a number of bands there. On the 3rd of February 2000, I think just before the album came out, and it's got a very unusual set list. So remembering this is before the album has come out and the band are playing Out of This World, Watching Me Fall, The Last Day of Summer, Maybe Somebody Someday, 39, Bloodflowers. So 6 songs off the album, and the only single that they're playing on this particular set that was released in the country that the show was happening was A Forest, which was the last song. So they were playing a 14-song set with one hit single in it, which is one way of making sure that only the hardcore fans continue to turn up and see you. And this is a radio broadcast, so if you're looking for a radio broadcast of a show from that tour, you can go for the 20 Years bootleg CD. These things are hard to get, and they're probably blocked on Discogs now. But 20 Years is a pretty good one. I found these in Manchester in the mid 2000s, when hardly anybody was interested in the Cure, and the person that was buying these Cure bootlegs had clearly decided to trade them in. This is a second bootleg CD. It's called These Flowers Always Die. Again, this was recorded in Atlanta on February the 23rd, 2000. The set list is exactly the same with one minor adjustment. In Between Days is on the set list, In Between the Edge of the Deep Green Sea and If Only Tonight We Could Sleep. And then they also played, as a special encore, Figurehead and Disintegration. So there are only two singles that are played during this show, In Between Days and Forest. Actually, and Fascination Street, because Fascination Street was released in America. And I'm not quite sure why they use these pictures on the inside. These are clearly from 1996. But these shows were in small venues, 2,000-3,000 people. They sold out a lot quicker than if The Cure had only sold 4,000 tickets in a 15,000 seater arena. It's very easy to sell 3,000 tickets in a 3,000 seat room when you've got 4,000 tickets that you would sell in a 15,000 seat room. And the only thing you have to really worry about is there are 1,000 people that would have come to see you that didn't come to see you, and those people, since they haven't seen you, are not going to care so much. Secret gigs are absolutely great as long as you can get in. I've never been a fan of secret gigs, by the way, because that always means there's going to be somebody who's outside who can't get through the door. And I don't like the idea of music being an elitist club. I had the same conversation with somebody who thought that some Frightened Rabbit records shouldn't be repressed on vinyl because their copies are worth a lot of money. And I'm like, well, that's actually not the reason why you should buy records. You should buy records because the music inside has changed you, changed your life, and spoken to you about who you are and what you are, as opposed to just being rare and difficult that you can sell for £200 on eBay to somebody that really, really wants the music. So I thought, actually, at this point, I should point out, I didn't see The Cure on the Bloodflowers tour. They didn't exist on this tour. I lived in Birmingham, a city of only over 1 million people, and The Cure didn't think that it was important enough to play Birmingham. They didn't think it was important enough to play Sheffield or Manchester or Glasgow. It was London, London, London. And what that meant was they sold 14,000 tickets for 2 shows, whereas they'd actually sold 56,000 tickets for London alone 4 years previously. And so for me, I really disconnected from The Cure during this period. I also, by the way, on the night that this was recorded at the AB in Brussels, I would much rather have been here as opposed to what was happening in my personal life at the time, because I was splitting up with my partner of 4 years that day, and that was a horrible experience. And seeing The Cure play that set would have been much much better. It would have also only been delaying the inevitable, but I guarantee you it would have been a better evening than the one that I had. Since there were no singles that were released from the album, even though maybe someday, and Out of This World were sent to radio, some remixes were prepared of the album tracks. The American Psycho soundtrack album, there is a remix of Watching Me Fall by The Underdog, which was a baffling choice to remix a track, but they did their best. And then come to the end of the tour, and the band ended their tour with a short Australian tour, which included playing a cover of Joy Division's Love Will Tear Us Apart, which has not yet been released but was broadcast on radio in Sydney, and I'll post a link to it again in the comments box. Which brings us to the end of the Bloodflowers tour, and I think it really hurt the band because they didn't tour, which means that if you were on the fence about whether you still liked The Cure, they released an album, and if you weren't convinced that that album was the best album that they'd ever made, you couldn't even be convinced by seeing them that they were still good live, because they only played London, which meant that if you were in Glasgow, you had to drive to another country to see The Cure. And in fact, The Cure didn't play Glasgow between 1992 and 2019. They didn't play, after 1996, they played Manchester in 2004. They played Leeds in 2012 and Manchester then in 2016. The Cure have not played Birmingham, for example, since 1996, which is 25 years ago. And it is no surprise, therefore, that perhaps their commercial profile in the UK isn't as big when they won't do something as simple as play one of the biggest cities in the UK. They haven't played Cardiff since 1996. They haven't played Birmingham. haven't played Sheffield, they haven't played Edinburgh. They played Glasgow once in the past 29 years. They've played Leeds once, they played Manchester twice in the past 25 years. It's not a surprise if you don't go and do the bloody work. People like Depeche Mode, New Order, Pet Shop Boys, they are bigger in some respects because they play shows which you don't have to drive 8 hours to get to. And that sounds like I'm moaning. I most definitely am, because I didn't see the band on the Bloodflowers tour. I saw them in 2001 at Roskilde, which was rescheduled from a show that was due to happen on the 30th of June 2000, but didn't because some people died during the Pearl Jam show, and so therefore the Cure weren't able to play. So I saw the last show of the Bloodflowers tour in July 2001. That was followed by the release of the Greatest Hits album, entitled, perhaps unsurprisingly, Greatest Hits. As I understand it, Greatest Hits was a commercial decision to allow the Cure to get out of their deal with Fiction when their deal had come to an end, and was sort of a contractual obligation. So the happier songs that the band had recorded during the Bloodflowers period, that is Cut Here and Just Say Yes, had been revisited, re-recorded and represented on this album. There was also a third track called Signal to Noise, which was the B-side of the single Cut Here, and there was also, I think, a remix of Cut Here as well, the Missing remix. So this was the only CD single, or the only commercial single, that the band released between 1997 and 2004 by The Cure. Which means, therefore, that they couldn't have hits because they weren't even giving songs a chance to not be hits. They were just not releasing them. I'm not a huge fan of the Greatest Hits album. The DVD is okay, but it is staggeringly incomplete. It's only got 18 videos, 3 alternate videos hidden in bullshit menus, and 6 songs played acoustically. And the acoustic hits made up acoustic versions of all of the hits on disc 2 of the Greatest Hits release. Boris came back to the band for a day and played with Jason as 2 drummers in The Cure for the acoustic hits part of the recording. I was thoroughly unimpressed with the release of Greatest Hits. As far as I was concerned, I was buying an album of acoustic Cure re-recordings with a bonus hits disc stuck in there that I didn't really want in the first place. Sorry guys, I buy music for what I don't already have. I don't buy old albums just because I've already got the albums. I know the albums are already good. I bought them the first time. The Greatest Hits was, to me, it sounded like another attempt to make the band successful again and go, look, at least we can do a Greatest Hits album. But of course, that meant that the Greatest Hits album here, which was never released on vinyl at the time, it was only released on vinyl, I think it was the 2018, 2019 picture disc for Record Store Day, and then the acoustic hits version is again the acoustic album released as a double picture disc for Record Store Day on the same year. That was a very expensive year. I forget which year this was that it came out. But again, it's difficult to say that it's really easy to say, oh, our singles aren't hits when you don't release the singles. And a lot of the B-sides from the period were released on 2004's Join the Dots box set. So Join the Dots, CD 4 of this features a track called More Than This, which was recorded for the X-Files album, which I've forgotten to mention, the cover version of World in My Eyes, a track called Possession, which undoubtedly would have been a B-side from the album, a Paul Oakenfold remix of Out of This World, the acoustic version of Maybe Someday, which was remixed and released on the promotional CD. So alongside that and the hybrid mix, you're able to get 2 versions of Maybe Someday. A track called Coming Up, which, as I've mentioned before, was on the Japanese and Australian and vinyl editions of the album. The B-side to Cut Here, which was Signal to Noise, an acoustic version of Signal to Noise, a remix of Just Say Yes by Curve, and the last track was a re-recording of A Forest featuring Earl Slick from David Bowie's band. which was not released until the release of this box set in 2004. This is an absolutely essential item in your Cure collection if you're a Cure fan. And then before I'm going to wrap up here with the last thing from the period, I'm going to end at the end of 2001 with the Greatest Hits album. Is Robert Smith re-recorded A Forest and added vocals and guitar to a remix and re-recording by the production duo Blank and Jones, which was released as a single in 2003. The video for this was shot in Dungeness, by the way, at the Dungeness Sound Mirrors, which is one of my very favourite places in the universe, apart from possibly this very building I'm in right now. That was The Cure's Bloodflowers album. Not my favourite Cure album. The sound of a band creatively and commercially in retreat, and I think the sound of a band that perhaps had realised or were starting to second guess what they thought their fans wanted as opposed to what their fans actually wanted. That said, Bloodflowers is a really good album. It's an album that's taken me many years to get into liking. At the time it came out, I was heartbroken. It wasn't what I needed to hear. It wasn't what the rest of the world wanted to hear. And I couldn't even say that they were good live because I couldn't see them live because the nearest place they played to me was 110 miles away. And there are limitations to what we can do. So that is The Cure's Bloodflowers and Greatest Hits. That's 1998 to 2001. From here, everything seemed to get better and brighter. Thank you for your time. I will post links to shows in the comments, links to remixes and rare tracks and the radio session versions. Stay beautiful, and I'll see you all again soon. Thank you, and bye.